and welcome to my review of Naruse Mikio's film adaptation of the novel that I reviewed recently, The Sound of the Mountain. I think this is a very interesting film and very interesting in terms of its techniques in adapting Kawabata's acclaimed novel. Although perhaps I should better phrase that as the lack of techniques, if you like, in terms of adapting Kawabata's novel. Because what is notable about this film, I think in many ways its strengths, although potentially also its weakness as well, is the way that it, as it were, plays and adapts Kawabata at face value. That is, it goes in for very little, if anything, of the intricate, complex subjectivity and narrational engagement with time and space that marks out Kawabata's text. So in many ways, this is a complementary version of the story rather than an adaptation thereof, even though it stays faithful to almost everything in terms of characters and incidents and detail and relationships that Kawabata details and explores in his novel. So it's a very interesting sort of test case for adaptation. And I think few other directors than Naruse would have cut such a confident and clear swathe through this material and presented it in such a, at least ostensibly, simple fashion. I offered a quite detailed synopsis of this in my review of the novel, so I'm not going to repeat myself overtly here. If you are brand new to this material and you want a synopsis, then I direct you to my my review of Kawabata's story. Suffice it to say that it retains the sense of a troubled family. It retains the sense of their home as the sort of anchor point, both narratively and thematically. And it retains as a key relationship the bond and the closeness between the aged patriarch Shingo and his daughter-in-law Kikuko, who is struggling in her marriage to Shingo's son Shuichi. His philandering and violent tendencies are also present here, and that in no small measure has contributed to the erosion of his marriage, although not entirely. And there is also the presence of Shingo's daughter, Fusako, who, as in the novel, returns to the family home with her children following her walking out on her own marriage, on her own husband. Although her husband, Aihara, is much less prominent here. He's never a literal presence, an actual presence in the novel, but what happens to him does impact on the direction the story takes, and that is excised here, I think wisely, by Naruse and his screenwriter. Naruse's The Sound of the Mountain stars Hara Setsuko as Kikuko and Uehara Ken as her husband Shuichi. There is thus a sense that this film forms a kind of loose trilogy along with the earlier Repast and the later Sudden Rain. In all three films, Hara and Uehara play a married couple whose marriage is disintegrating, if not has disintegrated, and in which there are all kinds of recriminations and tensions and accusations and a sense of domestic disquiet and disharmony. And there are all sorts of factors that feed into this and all sorts of ramifications of this. It's interesting to think about these three films together, because here it is the extended family that are living together, whilst in the other films, although there are various people who come to stay with the married couple, they live by themselves. Here, of course, there are three generations under one roof. And this is something that is raised explicitly in the narrative. There's talk towards the end of the fact that Shingo thinks that it may be beneficial to his son and daughter-in-law's marriage if they get a house of their own, if they move out of the family home, as it were. And I think what's interesting about this is the extent to which this is self-serving rather than entirely altruistic on Shingo's part. The fact that he wants to sort of have Kikuko, with whom he, as I've said, is very close, out of his sight, as it were, suggests that it is his own feelings, and I don't mean that in any sort of romantic or sexual way, that are colouring the disquiet between husband and wife. This is something that is sort of tenuously raised and probed, particularly by Yasuko, Shingo's wife, who is often quite curt with him and quite blunt. But the fact that we have this raised here, I think, suggests elsewhere that people's actions and behaviour and motives and motivations are as self-serving as they are sort of generous, even when they apparently appear to be the latter. The opposite is also true, I think, throughout the narrative of The Sound of the Mountain, where actions and attitudes that may on the surface seem a little harsh or uncaring, especially from the point of view of Shuichi and Fusako, are actually relatable to their respective feelings of hurt on the one hand, or almost abandonment on the other. The elephant in the room, almost throughout the narrative, is Shingo's attitude toward and feelings for Kikuko. And this is something that I think feeds the way that Shuichi behaves. It doesn't absolve him of any responsibility or blame for what are related as very dark actions, although we only have, in some instances, characters who we aren't overly familiar with. We only have their word for events that transpired. And also Fusako, who seems constantly to think that she is being unfavourably compared with Kikuko, and also berates her father rightly or wrongly, for what we take to be an arranged marriage between herself and Aihara. She certainly lashes out at her father and relates the actions that she undertakes to, again, this deep felt sense of loss and deep felt sense of having been sort of married off, almost shipped off. And therefore she can but react with a certain amount of animosity, even though there's no sort of grand scene where all this comes to the fore. It's all something that we infer through dialogue and through body language and gesture. Her resentment towards Kikuko. I spent some time in my review of Kawabata's novel, The Sound of the Mountain, talking about the intricate narration that sort of bleeds in and out of subjective reflection and objective sort of detached narrational judgment. And this takes up a lot of the novel. Naruse, I think, wisely and very concisely and confidently cuts through that. So what we're left with here is something that is very faithful on the one hand to the characters, to their relationships, the main incidents, but on the other, kind of eschews all the dreams that pepper Kawabata's narrative, all the subjective sort of procrastinations and pontifications that beset Shingo. It also does away with the sense of sort of doubt on his part, doubt over his failing physical health and doubt over his failing sort of mental capacities. The fact that he seems to be very much in the twilight of his life, and he's beginning to come to terms with that. And I think that colours a lot of his actions and relationships in the novel. Here, although the character is similarly an aging patriarch, the sense of infirmity in Kawabata's novel is not really to the fore. So we're left, I think, on the one hand with a slight lack of the kind of complexity where we have Shingo's weaknesses as well as his sort of almost stubborn reflectiveness. I think on the paper, his character emerges as someone who is kind of lost in the slippage between physical and mental decay on the one hand, and a sense of trying to cling to something in lieu of that on the other. So about morality, about ethics, about how a parent should behave, how the behaviour of one's children reflects on the parent. And he seems to be clinging to that to try and sort out some of his own actions and feelings. And I don't think he's always kind of fully aware of that. As I said, this complexity is eschewed by Naruse. So we just get his sort of blunt actions. We get the way that he speaks to those around him, the way that he relates to those around him. And I think this is the correct way to go. I think the film would have really struggled, or any film would really struggle to convey the as it were essence. I don't like that word a lot, but let's use it nonetheless. Of Kawabata's prose. Here, Naruse, by this stage in his career, you know, a very able, very artistic craftsman. He is able to sort of present at face value these characters and at the same time suggest some of the depths. This is partly through casting. I think our views of particularly Kikuko are shaped by the fact that she is played by Hara Setsuko. And I think perhaps more than almost any other Naruse film, maybe with the exception of Repast, there is a kind of probing of Hara's film persona as the eternal virgin here. I think Naruse seems to be in some ways cozying up to that image, if only to suggest it as a kind of a facade or even a performance. So it's very complex and interesting from that point of view. So definitely, if you get the chance, have a look at The Sound of the Mountain. If you know the novel, then, you know, you really don't need me or shouldn't need me to suggest that you watch the film. But it's a very interesting film. It's deceptively straightforward, and I think the setting, although Naruse makes nothing of it, or nothing overt, he doesn't go into it. The setting is very important in Kamakura. The sort of rural location of Kamakura is very meaningful here, and the fact of having this home drama in this slightly less urbanized, slightly less sort of metropolitan and cosmopolitan location is perhaps offering something of a commentary on the Shomingeki home drama, as well as on certain personae in terms of the actors involved. Comment and subscribe. Follow me on X, AdamBingham01, and have a look at my website for much more on Japanese culture at culturaljapan.com. Thank you very, very much for watching, as always, and I will see you on the next video.